Are you tired of making the same English mistakes over and over again? These common errors might be holding you back from fluency. In this episode, I'm going to list some of the most common mistakes I see learners making in English and give you some tips on how you can fix them. Knowing this information will help you sound more confident, more fluent, and obviously more accurate. Let's dive in. Hey there, how's it going? Thiago here, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. Before I start talking about English mistakes here, I would like to invite you to join my private community. By becoming a member of the community, you get to interact with me and other learners on a regular basis. You get to exchange messages with each other, share your wins with English, your struggles with English, your questions about English. And also by becoming a member, you unlock access to exclusive content like monthly masterclasses that I'm always updating the platform with. Also one live Q&A session with me so that we can hang out live and you can ask me questions about English and much more. So if you want to learn more about what's included in the community and how you can participate, just check out the link here in the description of the video. I'm also going to leave it in the pinned comment below. And if you are listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, just go to the show notes of this episode and you're going to find the link there. Learn more about it and you are officially invited to become a member of my private community. In English teaching, we usually categorize the mistakes learners make into two separate areas. Two kinds of mistakes, let's say. We have errors and slips. Both of them are mistakes, but they are slightly different. An error is a mistake a learner makes because that learner has never learned about that topic. So since the person has never learned about that topic, that learner will produce that topic in a sentence incorrectly because of lack of knowledge. So that's an error. For example, think of a beginner learner who has never learned about the simple past tense. If the learner says something like, I go to school yesterday, that is a mistake, yes, but more specifically, that's an error. Because the only reason why that learner is making that mistake is because nobody has taught the simple past to that person yet, or that person hasn't studied it yet. Okay? On the other hand, a slip happens when the learner has already learned or studied about that topic, but maybe because of inattention, lack of focus, tiredness, distraction, the learner makes that mistake. Still, not because the person has never learned about that. Okay. So a slip is different from an error. Okay. So as I go over this list of mistakes today, I want you to reflect on the kind of mistakes these topics represent to you. Okay. I want you to think to yourself, okay, is this an error in my case? Do I need to study this because I've never learned about this before? Or is this more of a slip? I've already learned about this. I've already studied this, but I still make this mistake. Okay. So if you identify one of these points here as an error, then you have to go and study about that topic. Okay. Or find a teacher to teach you about that. Okay. Now, if you identify that it's more of a slip, if you say to yourself something like, oh, I've already learned this, but I'm still making mistakes with this, then you need to practice this topic more. Okay. Maybe you have to review this topic, maybe do some exercises and practice using it in conversation more often. Okay. Having said that, let's get started with our list of common mistakes. The first mistake I see has to do with subject-verb agreement. The verb in a sentence must agree with the subject when it comes to the number, whether the subject is singular or plural. So you got to be able to identify in a sentence who or what the subject is and whether it is in the singular or plural form. This is really important for you to be able to identify because that will dictate what kind of verb you use later in the sentence. So that will dictate whether you use go or goes, is or are, have or has. Let me give you an example. The group of students are going on a field trip. The group of students are going on a field trip. Is the sentence correct? No. Well, let's identify the subject. Who or what is my subject here? The group of students. But notice that the group is my subject. The group of students. How many groups am I talking about? Just one. One group of students. So that subject is singular, in the singular form. So I have to say the group of students is going on a field trip. The subject is the group. You see that students is in the plural, so you think that that is your subject. So you might say the group of students are going. But the subject here is not the students per se, is the group of students. And how many groups do we have here? Just one. Got it? The group of students is going on a field trip. Another example. The women sitting at the meeting were bored. That's correct because my subject here is the women. The women, that's they. That's plural. So the women were bored. I cannot say the women sitting at the meeting was bored. All right? So you got to be able to identify both the subject of the sentences you read, you produce, and whether you are communicating something in the singular or plural form. The more you practice and the more you study English, the more second nature this becomes to you. But this is definitely a very common mistake. So make sure you have the verbs in your sentence agreeing with the main subject of your sentences. The next mistake I see that is really common has to do with articles. The articles, a, an, and the. Articles in English are used to specify or generalize nouns. Learners often struggle with when to use articles or which article to choose. So what I see happening a lot is the learner either using a when they should have used an, or even the, or not using the article when the article should be used. This is quite common, especially depending on your native language. Look at this sentence. I saw an elephant at zoo. This is incorrect. There's an article missing there, a definite article. I saw an elephant at the zoo. I saw an elephant at the zoo. Okay? Just to give you a very brief explanation here, we use indefinite articles, a or an, first when talking about countable nouns in the singular form, meaning just one. For example, I could say one computer or a computer or a cell phone instead of one cell phone. Okay? And the definite articles we use when we want to be specific about something. Going back to the indefinite articles, when we don't want to be specific about a certain object or thing, we can just say or an. For example, I can say, I have a computer. I have a computer. It doesn't really matter what kind of computer I have. I just want to tell you that I have a computer. Now imagine you and I are in the same room together and both of us are using one computer. Just one computer. Both of us are using. I could tell you something like, hey, look at the computer. What do you see there? Look at the computer. Why? Because now I'm being specific about what kind of computer or what computer I want you to look at. It's that one that both of us are using right now. You see, so definite articles are specific. A or an, not really specific. Another tip about this topic is when not to use the definite article. When you talk about things in general, it's not necessary for you to use the definite article the. For example, people are nice. I'm talking about people in general. So I don't have to say the people are nice. I can just say people are nice. Got it? Now, listen to the difference. The people in my neighborhood are nice. Now I'm being specific. I'm not talking about people in general. I'm talking about the people in my neighborhood or from my neighborhood. Now it's a very specific group of people. So this is one topic that I see learners struggling with all the time. So think to yourself, is this more of an error in your case or more of a slip? If it is a slip, you have to practice this more. You have to learn about it. You have to review it. Okay? But make sure you have this reflection over there. The next mistake has to do with prepositions. Oh yeah, the prepositions. I call them the Achilles heel of every English learner, even the most advanced ones. In, on, at, of, about, right? So prepositions show the relationship between words in a sentence, often indicating time, place, or direction. They can be tricky because their usage often doesn't directly translate from other languages. For example, I live on France. No, I live in France. All right? So when it comes to prepositions, guys, I think the best way to learn them is by memorizing them, is by being exposed to lots of English, listening and reading lots of English, because over time you start internalizing the correct prepositions and which prepositions tend to go with certain verbs. Okay? But I can try to briefly explain here to you, at least in, on, and at, like on a very surface level. And usually has this idea of inside. Inside. Okay? On has this idea of like this, on the surface of something, on. Okay? And at, when it comes to places, you could think about it as around the place or near the place, So for example, I am at the restaurant is different from I am in the restaurant. I am in the restaurant. I am inside the restaurant, literally inside. I am at the restaurant. I am around the restaurant. I might be inside or outside or next to it. I am around. Got it? And on, let's say, you have things on the desk. So it's this idea of surface. But even though I'm trying to explain the rationale behind some prepositions here, guys, I still believe that the best way for you to learn prepositions is by consuming lots of English and memorizing the prepositions. For example, fill in the blank, listen, blah, 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 music. Which preposition goes in the middle here? Listen, music. I think, you just thought about it, right? 2, listen to music. Listen to music. Why were you able to get that right? Because you have heard that combination probably thousands of times already by now in movies, in series, in conversations with people. The same thing applies to the other combinations and prepositions. So the more you are exposed to English, the better your preposition use becomes. So eventually you gotta memorize that you are interested in something and not interested about something, for example. Okay? So prepositions are also really problematic for many learners. The next mistake has to do with the verb tenses. English has a complex system of verb tenses to express different time frames. Learners often mix up tenses or use them incorrectly. For example, I have seen that movie yesterday. This is incorrect. The correct way would be I saw that movie yesterday, right? So think to yourself, is this an error in your case or is this a slip? Have you already learned? Have you already studied about present perfect and past simple and also the difference between them? Okay? If you have already studied about this, but you still make mistakes about this, that's an indication that you have to review this information and maybe do more exercises, more practice with these structures. All right? So here's another example. Do you don't know? This is wrong. Do you don't know? No. The correct structure here is don't you know? All right? Guys, this reminds me of one student I had a long, long time ago, maybe almost 20 years ago, who struggled a lot with verb tenses in English. She was a beginner at the time, and it wasn't easy for her to learn the structures of the language. So even after having been taught the structures, she would still do some crazy things. For example, I remember once she said something like, "Where do you will go yesterday?" I kid you not. I'm for real, So she was able to mix in the same sentence, in the same question, present, past, and future. Where do you will go yesterday? So I have do you, which is present, and will go, which is future, and yesterday, which is past. So how do you fix this? How do you get better using the structures, the verb tenses in English? Consuming lots of English again. I think that reading is excellent for that, for grammar acquisition. So read a lot of English because you see how how the structures are formed in the book, in the reports that you read. But also you can do some grammar exercises on very specific topics that you struggle with. Maybe past simple versus present perfect. Okay? Moving on to the next mistake, we have word order. How you place the words in a sentence. English word order is generally subject, verb, object, which I also call complement. But there are variations depending on the type of sentence. So for example, if you say something like, quickly the dog ran, this is not correct because quickly is an adverb, and adverbs tend to go after the main verb of the sentence. So it's better to say the dog ran quickly, not quickly the dog ran. The dog ran quickly. Okay? The next mistake has to do with countable and uncountable nouns. Some nouns can be counted, like apples, books. You can say 1 apple, 2 apples, 3 apples, 10 books, 20 books. But other nouns cannot be counted, like water, advice. I can't say 2 waters or 2 advices. Okay? And this also has to do with many and much. So many, so much. Too many, too much. Quantifiers. Countable versus uncountable nouns. So, for example, if you say, I have many advices for you, this is incorrect because the word advice is uncountable. You can say, I have a lot of advice for you. That is correct. I have a lot of advice for you. Since we are on this topic, there are some words that I hear learners using them wrong all the time, and they are uncountable words, but I see many learners treating them as countable. These words are information, equipment, news, homework. Information, equipment, news, homework. Guys, these words are all uncountable. So we should treat them as singular words. So don't say informations. Oh, there is a lot of informations. No, there's a lot of information here. Or equipment. Many equipment? No, a lot of equipment, you could say. News. It's funny because the word news has an S at the end, but the word news is uncountable. So you have to treat it as a singular word, even though it has an S at the end. So you shouldn't say the news are bad. You should say the news is bad. Okay? The same thing applies to the word homework. Don't say homeworks. I have 3 homeworks to do, or I have a lot of homeworks to do. You have homework to do, a lot of homework to do. There are ways, though, for you to count these words. For example, homework, you could count homework with the word assignment. So you have homework assignment. Now you can count the assignment. I have 2 homework assignments to do, or I have 10 homework assignments to do. But notice that I'm using the word assignments in the plural form, not the word homework. Okay? For the other words, equipment, news, and advice, or even information, you can count them with the word piece. So 2 informations is incorrect, but 2 pieces of information, that's correct. I could tell you that I have 2 pieces of information to give you. Okay? Or in my studio, I have 3 main pieces of equipment. Got it? Or that I have a piece of news to share with you. Okay? So this is something that, again, reflect. Is this more of an error in your case? You've never studied this for real, countable and uncountable words, or is it more of a slip? Okay? So if it is more of a slip, review it. If it is more of an error, go learn it. Go learn about it. Okay? Moving on here to the next mistake, irregular verbs in the past. The tricky part about irregular verbs in the past is that they don't follow the standard rules for forming the past tenses. If you have the regular verbs in English, it's quite easy, right? You have some rules. You add ed sometimes, you just add d or ied, like worked, played, right? Work, worked, play, played, study, studied. Okay? These are regular verbs in English. But the irregular verbs, they can be tricky if you haven't memorized the most common ones at least. So you gotta memorize that it's drove, not drived. Okay? And even the past participle, you have to memorize that it's driven. I have driven instead of I have drove. Okay? So if you say, for example, I goed to the park yesterday, that's not correct. I went to the park yesterday. So you gotta learn and, again, memorize the irregular verbs in English. Again, the best way to do this is by consuming English every day, consistently, okay? And maybe being more mindful, is this a regular verb or irregular verb? Okay, so I gotta memorize that and learn that. Another one that I just thought about was the verb cut. It's an irregular verb, and all the conjugations here are the same. Cut, cut, cut. But I have seen learners going cutted or cutted. I cutted the meat. I cutted the meat. No, you cut the meat. Okay? So pay attention to irregular verbs in English. Okay? This is another very problematic area that even intermediate and upper intermediate learners, I see them making a lot of mistakes with that. Moving on here, we have the gerunds versus infinitives. This is another problematic area. When do you say working? When do you say to work? Right? So, for example, if you say, I enjoy to swim in the ocean, that's wrong. The correct way is, I enjoy swimming in the ocean. And not only that, but there are some confusing gerunds and infinitives. For example, think of the word stop, the verb stop. I can say, I stopped to smoke. And I can also say, I stopped smoking. So in the first example, I'm using the infinitive. I stopped to smoke. In the second example, I'm using the gerund. I stopped smoking. Both are correct, but they have different meanings. So maybe I was driving on the road and then I decided to stop to smoke. I stopped to smoke. Now, if I say I stopped smoking, I quit the habit. I don't do that anymore. You see? Another example about that could be with the verb remember. Check it out. I remembered to lock the door versus I remembered locking the door. So I remembered to lock the door. This means that you remembered that you needed to lock the door, and then you did it. Now, I remembered locking the door. This means you have a memory of locking the door in the past. Okay? So if you want to remind someone to do something, usually you use infinitive. You're going to say, hey, remember to pay the rent today, okay? Oh yeah, I have to remember to pay the rent today. But if you talk about memories, you're going to use the gerund or the ing form. When I was a kid, I remember going to my grandma's house all the time. I remember staying up late when I went there. Got it? So that's another problematic topic. Gerunds versus infinitives. Again, think to yourself, is this more of an error for me? I've never formally studied this for real. Or is this more of a slip? Okay? I want to close this episode, guys, by making a comment here about errors and slips, right? I told you in this episode that mistakes can be categorized into errors and slips, okay? But there is one piece of information, you see, one piece of information that I haven't given you yet about this. So remember, just to recap, an error is you make the mistake because you've never really learned about that topic. You've never really studied it. Nobody has ever taught you. So because of your lack of knowledge, because of your ignorance, you make that mistake. Okay? When it comes to slips, you have already studied that topic. You have already learned about that topic. Somebody has already taught you, but you still make mistakes about that topic. But there are also different kinds of slips here. If, for example, if you have already studied the past simple and the present perfect, many times actually, maybe at language schools that you've been to, in private classes with a teacher, you've already studied that topic, but you still make mistakes with these two structures frequently. This kind of slip is more of what we call a developmental error. So it is more in the ballpark of an error than a slip per se, okay? So we have the error, I know nothing about this topic. Then we have the next level, which is like, I've learned about this topic, I've studied it, but I still make a lot of mistakes about this topic. That could be considered a slip, but I would call it more of a developmental error, meaning that it is an error still, but since you have already learned about it and studied it, you are in the development process. You are developing your ability with that topic. Because, slips, especially for me, slips are more related to tiredness, distraction, lack of focus. It's more related to higher levels of proficiency. Very advanced users of English tend to have slips, not really mistakes or errors, because by that point or by that time, they have already learned pretty much all there is to learn about the structures of English, about English vocabulary, but again, because of lack of focus, tiredness, distraction, they might still make some mistakes here and there. Those mistakes, to me, are more in the slips category. So the idea is the higher your proficiency level gets, the more your mistakes become slips. Got it? The lower your proficiency level is, the more errors you have. You make errors, lots of errors. And then as you start progressing in your journey and moving up the levels, your errors become developmental errors, and then they become slips, So that's pretty much the progression here when it comes to mistakes. But now I want to hear from you. Which of these topics that I listed today do you struggle with the most? And is there any topic here that you have never formally learned? You have never formally studied? Let me know in the comment section. I am curious to know. Guys, thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you found it useful. Don't forget to check out my private community. It's a great place for you to have positive feedback there, constructive feedback, and also learn more about the English language. If you are interested, you can also check out my pronunciation course. This is a standalone course that teaches you the main sounds of the English language, the main connected speech patterns that we hear in spoken English. So you can also check that. The links are all here in the description of the video, in the pinned comment, and in the show notes. And a free way for you to support my work is by liking this video, sharing this video with your contacts, leaving a comment, interacting with the video, and subscribing to the channel here on YouTube if you're not a subscriber yet. If you are on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you can also leave me a 5-star review there. It doesn't cost you anything, and it helps me tremendously. Okay? Guys, I'm Thiago. I'm signing off. Thank you so much, and I'll be talking to you very soon in the upcoming episode. Bye-bye.